mediation with, but we all know him as the chair of the board that sets the governing rules and processes for mediators to follow as a self-governing sector. So I've asked Robert to explore the importance of self-governance and how some of these challenges that we've heard about all morning are going to impact on us as mediators. So I'm going to just share the presentation for you. If this one works with you being able to control the actual presentation.
Now, here's the test. What do I need to do?
Just if you just scroll through with your mouse or change screen with one of your cursors. Do it. I will do it.
Nothing behind. Let me just check whether anything can happen here.
No, it's not. I'll do it. Don't worry. I can do that.
If I can ask you to do the duty, that would be most kind. So we can leave it there for a second. Thank you. Yes, it would be lovely to be able to see each other in person. I confess this is the first time I've done a presentation on Zoom. It's not something I enjoy. I can't say I enjoy Zoom in any respect. So if it goes wrong, please excuse me, but I'm sure that we can get through it. As Mike said, I am a very recent and non-professional engaged person in family mediation. I retired from career in the health service largely in 2013, and in 2015 I joined the Family Mediation Standards Board and became its chair, which I've been doing since pretty much then. So I bring a very external perspective to the whole thing, and there are lots of things about the family justice system which have been explained today which seem to me somewhat challenging and dysfunctional, to which mediation can make a great contribution. So I'm a great enthusiast, but I'm not inside the system itself. I just want to start with the words with which Justice Cobb finished his presentation. He said, "Stand ready." And I think it's really, really, really important that the mediation profession is ready. I'm sure it does stand ready. I think it's always easy, potentially, for people to think of regulation of something which impedes rather than encourages transformation, change, and readiness. I want to stake the claim and develop the argument, both in this talk and in the practice of the Standards Board as we do everything and go forward, that mediation is not about constraint and control as much as about developing opportunity and ensuring that there is a really strong foundation for, in this case, mediation to take its place, a very strong place in family justice. And my argument is that the strength of that is if we think about mediation as a profession, and that we base that professional strength on increasingly sophisticated regulation. And we'll explore that as we go forward. So if I could have the next slide, please. I really don't think that in this today and to this audience, I need to emphasize anything that you know all of that. All of that has been very, very strongly emphasized this morning by Justice Cobb, by other speakers, and it's something that everybody understands and knows about. I would just like to spend 1 minute on that third bullet point about the voucher scheme. I think it's a really important catalytic event in two ways. First of all, it mirrors the investment that the MOJ made in the early tens of this century, when it put some money into setting up the Family Mediation Council and the work that was required to develop the standards and create the Family Mediation Standards Board. The MOJ found some money from somewhere magically and wonderfully, because without it, I think we would all have found it extremely hard to have established the system that is now in place, and which I think is doing a lot of good work. I would, wouldn't I? But I do. And here is the MOJ saying, yeah, we've got to a point now where we really do think that the mediation world is demonstrating its benefit, and we will do another catalytic investment. But, and I'm going back to the point that Lisa made, there is a massive absence of information. We collect no data internally, but among the mediation community, that can help answer those questions that Lisa raised and other people raised, and I've raised for many years, not only about volume, but about usage, and most importantly, about outcome and benefit. And one of the things that's happening with the voucher scheme is that users of the vouchers are being asked to provide some data. And I see that as being a starting point for developing a more comprehensive and extensive data collection approach, which I'll come to a bit later. But I really do think that there is a critically important set of issues to be addressed there. Now, I want to use that also as an example of something which is a challenge. We identified the absence of data in, let's say, 2015, 2016. And we put it down on a list of things that we, the FMSB, Family Mediation Standards Board, wanted to do as soon as we could. That list, I think, ran 24 separate things that we wanted to do, and data collection was quite high, but it wasn't high enough to get into the first year's business plan or the second year's business plan, because the resources available to us are highly limited. We have one paid executive, we have supported by a group of paid people who do the administration, but everything else that we do is volunteer. I'm a volunteer, the other members of my board are volunteers, and we operate a system in which we draw mediators and others into supporting our work. And it severely constrains the pace and the scale of what we can do. Apart from that £150,000 that the MOJ gave 5-6 years ago, everything that we spend is raised from fees, from the subscriptions that you mediators pay, and which we have to guard very, very carefully, because we completely understand that mediation is not a highly rewarded profession, and that therefore it's an absolute requirement on us that we keep the subscriptions as low as we reasonably can, and we account for the use of that income punctiliously and carefully. So I am conscious that there are lots of things that we would very much want to do, which would be beneficial, but which we find it very hard to do, even with the enormous support, and I mean that very, very sincerely, the enormous support which we get from a body of mediators to do what we can. And I'm just saying that the data collection, the development of a policy and a process for information management and analysis is one of those things which we have, I confess, not been able to do at the pace which we would like to do. But let's, that's a general point. Let's move on, if we can have the next slide, please. Because I'm beginning to move from thinking about making the system work as we, the FMSB, inherited it, to moving that system into something that is more forward-looking. And our thesis, the FMSB's thesis and the FMC's thesis, is that the key thing there is to think about mediation as a profession. And there are lots of things that one might have to say about what a profession is. But one of the things that struck me very strongly when I came into this 5-6 years ago is that there are significant different schools of thought, schools of behavior, schools of practice, backgrounds, etc., in family mediation. And that rather too often, sadly, people within the community have kind of emphasized maybe the differences rather than the similarities and the strengths, the common core strengths that there are. And that has, from time to time, and I think I'm probably speaking to people who know this well, spread out into the perception that the other members, other stakeholders in the family justice system have about family mediation. And I absolutely understand how that's come about historically. But the key thing is that as a profession, family mediation will strengthen and become much more influential if when it emphasizes its common core and its joint strengths, wherever your background is and however you practice, and sees itself as far as possible, a united profession. And one of the that's in a sense point, I think, is that the strength of the profession comes from the rigor of its self-regulation, that it can point to being well managed, well regulated, and in a manner which is not self-serving. And in a way, as I said earlier, which doesn't create a straitjacket, but which allows for the development of the profession. I don't want to develop now thinking about what it means to be a profession, but I've listed some of the things that are key there. You count yourself to be a professional if you're dealing with things that are complex and challenging and difficult, which require competence, skill, and judgment. That is exactly what family mediation does. And what it, I think, creates is some kind of mutual accountability and responsibility between the individual practitioner and the profession as a community and the professional body and bodies that regulate it, the FMC and the FMSB in this case. So two things there. One I'd like to sort of just try out as an idea, which I'm thinking about, and trying to think of a good analogy for the way in which family mediation works. And my background is in health. And the best I can do is to think of family mediators rather like GPs. You get people arriving at your door with a more or less well-defined set of problems, and you have to help them as individuals and as pairs or groups or families through those problems, which you may be able to resolve very quickly, or you may find require quite a long period of time of engagement to carry through. So I'd just like to leave you with that thought and ask you to think about whether that's a useful analogy, because I'll come back to that when we think about how GPs are regulated. The second is to suggest, as I say at the last bullet point there, that there is a mutual accountability and responsibility between the practitioner and the professional bodies. i.e., this means that individuals are likely to be asked to undertake things or to provide things or to volunteer things or to behave in ways which they might not absolutely do, or in all of those senses, spontaneously, but which are for the good of the profession. And in my mind, that is what the data collection issue may be a useful illustration of. So, for instance, we do need to, I'm absolutely sure we all agree, we need to know a lot more about what mediation does, how it works. The only way we're going to get information about that is by asking mediators to provide it, and that is an extra burden potentially on your time and therefore cost, which you may think, well, why should we do? My argument is, and I hope it's one that you understand, as we develop what we want to develop, this is for the good of the profession. It may not benefit you absolutely directly, but it is for the good of the profession, and that's the deal that you're doing. That's the mutual benefit that there is. So I'll leave that with you and move on to the next slide, if I may. Thank you. So my role is as the chair of the regulatory body, and I want to concentrate on that. The regulatory body is, as you know, responsible and accountable to the representative body, the Family Mediation Council, the FMC, and the whole system is entirely voluntary. And I have frequently paid tribute to the activities of the profession in the early 2010s that set up this whole thing. It was a very, very challenging and demanding process, and I think the mediation profession deserves a lot of credit for the way in which it went about it then. And of course, you mediators, you did it yourselves. We've now institutionalized the regulation in the FMSB, and that has brought in the lay perspective, of which I'm a representative, and there are other members. Mike, though he's very involved in family mediation, is also a layman, and we are very, very fortunate to have just recruited him to the board, and are looking forward to working with him. And my experience over the last 5 years is that lay perspective and the contributions that lay people have made are critical to the authenticity and the credibility of the regulatory process. Because it gives more credibility, it gives more strength to the sense that the regulatory process is focused on the protection of and the best outcomes for the public and society rather than for the interests of the professionals. Bearing in mind that the origin of the regulatory process was designed by professionals. So it would be quite easy for people to say, it's all done, you want to do it for their own interests. And you've got provider capture. The profession has captured the regulatory system. I don't think it has at all, either because mediators in principle don't see it that way, and because we as lay people bring a balancing perspective. But it is absolutely critical that we take the mediation profession with us, and that we demonstrate that the regulatory processes and systems provide the necessary protection to practitioners, because it works both ways. We protect the public, but by virtue of being robust and rigorous, we both give defense to mediators as they practice well and offer the opportunity for development and growth. So how do we do it? Well, the original standards were devised in quite some speed. And as I said earlier, we inherited those, and we've been working with them consistently over the last 5 years. What we are now trying to do is to learn from the experience that we've had in all of that and develop some more structured and rigorous approach, rather more structured and rigorous approach to the way in which we describe the standards. So we are working towards describing them in a new way, which is outlined in those those 3 bullet points there. So we talk about the specification of what it is expected the standard should achieve, with a degree of flexibility about the how the way in which mediators may go about achieving those outcomes and outputs. And so you will find increasingly that as we move through the range of standards that we have got at the moment, and we begin to look at the different areas, we will describe them as musts, expectations, and guidance, and we will divide them into those 4 blocks of activity, etc., that you will see in that penultimate bullet point. And I don't want to get into a lot of detail at this point, come back to this slightly in relation to MIAMS, and can pick it up later. But I am always interested to know whether people see that as being useful and manageable. So the important thing is that a must is what it says. Non-compliance with a must will be considered a breach of the standards. An expectation is what it says. It's not a breach of the standards, but it is a normative description. So if you do that in that way, then you can absolutely expect.
Hi, is that Adam Wilson?
We seem to have got a...
Oh, Adam, hi, it's Nicola here from Creighton Mediation. Hello.
Hello.
I'm all right, Adam. Is now still a good time to talk?
I think I've muted.
Yep. An expectation is, but you have got the flexibility to say, oh, and they are sound. And then guidance is what it says. Guidance is good practice, but not part of the regulatory framework. And this is not, as we go through all of this, we're not seeking to invent new elements of the standards unless they're missing, because all of what we've got at the moment, there's a huge amount of material in all of the standards at the moment. It's just not terribly well presented and described. And if we go on to the next slide, please. They are discursive. There are some elements that need to be complete, and they are hard to navigate. One of the things that I remember very early on was that we wanted to change some minor points about the accreditation process in the first or second year that we looked at it. And in order to do so, we had to rewrite the whole element of the standard about that. We weren't able to, we had to go back to the FMC and get an FMC agreement to it, because there was no distinction of the different levels of significance that the standards might contain. Now we're talking about musts and expectations and guidance. We can put different parts of the current standards into more flexible arrangements and manage them more effectively. And so we need to do this over time and in priority. And it's turned out for various reasons that the MIAMs have been and are currently the pioneer and the pilot for all of this. And the work on that has been a huge stimulus to developing this thinking. Why is that? Why is it that MIAMs have come up? Well, they are absolutely critical in the process, as we've heard a couple of times today. And as we've also heard today, they were identified by the FSG, part of the Private Law Working Group, as being a critical and sometimes not entirely successful element in the process. And I think we all know that there are concerns sometimes about the exclusivity that mediators have over MIAMs, and you end up sometimes with people from other professions asking the question, why is it that mediators should be the only profession, the only group that's allowed to do a MIAM, whether it's we're talking here about MIAMs with a capital M, i.e. those that are connected with the court, though of course all mediation starts with some form of MIAM. Why is it that that's a role, an activity reserved to mediators? And I think it's really important that the mediation community is able to demonstrate with as much strength as possible that its role in MIAMS is absolutely deserved and highly valuable. So I think there are fair challenges around public protection and assurance to courts and the stakeholders, which when the FSG raised that challenge, led the FMC, if I could have the new slide, please. Yeah, so the FMC was, as it were, challenged to take this on, and it mandated the FMSB to include MIAMS as part of an urgent part of its rolling standards review. And so we established a working group, which is what we do for everything. Or it's a standard working practice where we bring together members of the board, volunteers from outside, and critically sometimes, volunteers who are there as individuals alongside volunteers who are in some way representing the views of their member organizations. Because I think we do have to understand that some member organizations have different views. And we did start this quite a long time ago, and it's taken a couple of years, really, nearly 2 years, to bring this to the conclusion that there is now being consulted upon with the mediation community. And the reason it's taken so long is that it was through this work that we developed our thinking about professionalism and the way in which we described the standards. Beforehand, when this work started, we thought we would just write down the way in which MIAMS worked, but we realized that very quickly as we did that, it didn't answer the questions that were being asked from the outside. So I have found this an immensely valuable learning experience, excuse me, both for me personally and for the group as a whole. And it's a very good illustration, in my view, of the way in which lay thinking came in to, in some cases, challenge and make life a bit difficult for the mediation view. And then the mediation view came back and said, well, yeah, we accept your challenge. We can see why you want to do it this way. And we reckon that we can work it through successfully. And now you've got out to consultation the processes and the systems that we are proposing. And we are very, very keen to welcome views. We've done a couple of webinars. We would like people to, I think that maybe the date has now closed last Friday, but we can always take final views again. What I want to emphasize is that though we are consulting with the mediation community, we're not doing so as a plebiscite, because in the end, we've got to bring all the views back and make sense of them collectively, and then make a judgment about all the issues with that lay perspective. But as you can see, what we will be doing, we will be focusing on that public benefit. We will want to make sure that as a consequence, the foundation for the role of the profession is absolutely secure, and that gives the opportunity for the profession to take up the challenge that Justice Cobb laid out at the beginning, which brings the thing to a neat conclusion, I think. Thank you very much for listening.
Right, I think I've got you back and everything. Just before, thank you for that, Robert. It's incredibly, having walked into that first meeting at the standard boards, there is so much to grapple with. There is so many elements to policing and creating the right systems and structures for mediation, but also doing it in a way that brings a whole mediation world along on that same journey, because it's pointless doing this if we don't have everyone on board. So there's a steep learning curve for me coming into that group, and I think there's a lot we could appreciate, and mediators can appreciate, about the hard work that you and the others put in as volunteers. I just want to change subject very quickly. I got asked to, I think there was a setting incorrect on the chat, so people couldn't share with everyone. So I've changed that so everyone can actually message to get a conversation going around the presentation. So that has now been changed. Sorry, Robert. I'm just trying to manage all the speakers at the same time as the audience. It's been a baptism of fire quite a lot of it, but we're getting there. It seems to be going on track. So so we're going through this MyAM consultation, and you've now got your feedback. I was just curious how many mediators attending today have actually contributed to that consultation. Has Helen provided you any sort of numbers on current responses?
I can't tell you the answer, I'm sorry to say. I don't know. I mean, I know that we had, I think, probably over 100 people on each of the 2 webinars that we did. So those were largely exploratory. How many written responses, I don't know.
But it's been quite an open process, and I know all mediators got copied in, so it'd be quite interesting to see the results.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
That process going forward. Just looking ahead then, so we get the MyAM sorted. What do you feel is the next bit of that journey in the standards, to review the standards?
You mean after we've...
After the conclusion of the MyAM part, what's the next bit that you're going to focus on?
Well, I mean, I actually think it's really important that we get the MyAM stuff right. So I think that for the next several months, that will be the overriding important requirement. It's really difficult to know at this stage, because I haven't seen the responses myself, what the degree of difficulty there may be in resolving some of the potential the differences that there are between different elements of the profession. My initial sense is that there is a very strong common agreement around the core, and that the areas that there may be some where we have to resolve some disagreements are more likely to be, in fact, almost certainly, I think, in the areas of what I would describe as guidance or expectations. So optimistically, we would be able to produce something which people can say is the best possible available solution for the MyAMs at the moment and in the next few months.
Okay.
I think that after that, I think we do need to think about a whole load of other things. The things that come to my mind, most importantly, we've already got work going on accreditation. The accreditation process, I don't want to be too sort of dismal about it, but it's really important, but it doesn't work terribly well for lots of people. So we have got a lot of work going on to improve that, and we've done quite a lot already, and we want to do more. And then the other area which I find really important to think about is the role of PPCs and how they fit into the assurance processes that we need to build up. So that gives you a feeling, I hope, Mike, of what we are thinking about.
Yep, no, that's really helpful, and I think there's lots, because I think a lot of mediators don't know don't have a very good understanding of some of the systems and processes and the work that's going on behind the scenes. So it's quite helpful for them to see the future a little bit. I'm going to finish there because I'm sure we'll come back to some of these points, and also it'll be interesting. Our next speaker, Jane Bridge. Jane, are you there?
Yes, I'm here, Mike.